So I'm gonna show you a few charts and graphs and talk a little bit about my work. But before I do that, I know that I really want to bring the voices of older people into this conversation first. And I learned long ago not to rely on video in a strange auditorium when you're not sure whether or not it's going to play. So I'm going to read you a couple of words about a participant that we're working with right now. Her name is Yukia, and Yukia is she's in San Antonio. She recently moved from San Diego to San Antonio, and when she arrived in San Antonio, she said she was going through a lot, and I'll just read you her words. She says, "I was going through a lot after my move, and I reached out to a therapist, and the therapist said, 'Hey, you need to be around people of your own age.' So I did my research, and I found the Alicia Trevino Lopez Senior One-Stop Center, and I started going there. I started meeting people, playing cards, and working out the exercise room. One day I happened to walk by a computer class. I hadn't done any computer classes since college, and I thought, why don't I just pop in here and brush up on some classes that I had taken 100 years ago? I was also looking for work at the same time, and I learned everything I needed to apply for a job in that class, and I got the job." She's Filipina, and she makes, one of her passions is that she loves to cook, and she makes a dish, a Filipino dish called lumpia. Has anybody heard of lumpia? Or have a few people out here, right? It's kind of like a Filipino version of the egg roll. It's a little bigger, a little lighter, crusty, and she's apparently got the best lumpia in the family. And so she said, I got the idea of wanting to make my lumpia into a business in 2025. She said, I've been making them for friends and family for years, and turning it into a business was not on my mind, but then my son said, Mom, let's turn this into a business. Then my Senior Planet instructor was talking to me. Senior Planet is the program that I run that does the training from OATS, and said, you know, AI can be used to market and develop your business and be creative. Why don't we look at developing some of those skills for you? So that's what we've done. We've made a logo that actually came from a picture of me, and we made stickers and thank you cards. And now I'm working on making business cards with AI. The whole class put me on another level. It inspired me to grow, and I really believe that without it, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And I just love that story because it captures a little bit of the challenge and opportunity that AI is bringing to our communities and to the people that we work with. You know, Max was talking about social isolation earlier and how critical and what a challenge that is. And so many people, when they move to a new community, they have to reestablish themselves. They have to find out what's going on out there. Yuki has been using AI, not just to build her business cards, but I learned from the trainer down there, she's asking AI to find local events in her community that are scheduled in the calendar, and then she goes to those events and sells and markets her product. So she's actually very strategic and knowledgeable now about how to time and position her outreach so that she can sell more of her lumpia products. And we all know that older adults are driving a lot of small business development. Actually, more than half of small businesses are sponsored by people over the age of 50. So this is actually not just an important part of our lives, but an important part of our economy as well. I'm going to read you one more quote before I launch in all my slides. This is from a participant in New York City at our center there. That Senior Planet's 5-week AI course was an extremely satisfying learning experience for me. Prior to participating in this class, I did not know much about AI apps, nor what I could do with them. As a result of this informative class, I am now able to comfortably explore and use a variety of AI apps, including Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot, and specialized AI offerings such as Suno and Notebook LM. I don't know those last two myself, so don't ask me about that. I have used Gemini to help me create a detailed 1,200-calorie, 7-day vegan diet plan, including recipes and grocery shopping list. I have a website and a blog, so I used Copilot to help me create an updated business plan, content ideas, integrated marketing plan, and search engine optimization strategy. I used AI to help me create a content outline and supporting information and book cover for an environmentally friendly book idea. And I also created a Christmas card using ChatGPT. I plan to continue exploring AI apps for business and for pleasure. Overall, the AI course opened my eyes to a whole world of AI opportunities. So I love that. That guy's like, I love the people that we train, they immediately go way beyond anything I personally can do, which makes it a lot of fun because I then learn from them and we kind of cycle it around. But it's amazing to see how much creativity and the different applications that people are bringing to this era of growing older with AI in our society. So that's the sort of backdrop here. I am going to launch my slides and see if they start working here. Okay, let's see, there you go. So I just want to call your attention to a couple of numbers. When I started OATS in 2004, only 22% of older people reported ever having used the internet. So if we cycle back about 25 years, Josefina will remember, most older adults were still saying, like, what is this internet thing and how do we get online and what are we supposed to do with it? And so when I started our organization, we were doing a lot of introductory training for people about what the technology was in the first place. Fast forward to today, and we have 30% of older Americans who have used generative AI. And if you can imagine those two bookmarks over just the course of about 20 years, 25 years, we've got a really gigantic sea change in terms of how people are experiencing technology in America. So I want to take a little bit of time today and kind of present a little bit of an AI scorecard for older adults. Where are we with this technology? What's the progression been? And I want to put some context in it. And Stephen helped me prepare some questions with the board, and I'm trying to answer all of these. One is, where does AI show up? Where do we find it in our lives? How are people using it? I've already answered part of that question, so Stephen, please check that off. Effect on our health and social connection and daily lives. What are some challenges faced by AI? Some ethical concerns that we may be facing, and its impact on the care and service providers, folks like ourselves here in this room. I want to put a little bit of context here these are the questions we're asking. I want to put a little bit of context here in how we're thinking about these questions, because AI didn't just start out of nowhere. It didn't start yesterday. It's actually part of a progression of technology advances that have been going on for decades, actually since the 1980s when personal computers started. So I'm going to give you just a quick historical overview to help contextualize a little bit of what we're looking at here. If you think about personal computers that started back in the 1980s, when I was in high school and college, people began using this technology, and then they started learning about email, which was originally just passed from computer to computer, and then they developed the web, and people started developing online programs, and e-commerce emerged in the 1990s, which was a big, obviously huge change economically. People remember the beginning of Wikipedia back in the mid-1990s, when everybody was excited about everybody was going to be doing self-generated content. That sort of stalled a little bit with Wikipedia, but is still happening. And then personal health records began also in the early 2000s. I have a copy of an old Health Affairs journal. Does anybody subscribe to Health Affairs here, the journal? And it's from 2005, and it details all of the personal health record progress that's being made, and it's predicting that we are transforming how people are interacting with health information at home. And the thinking was that these electronic medical record systems were going to create a sort of personalized health experience for people in their homes, and the authors were predicting that was going to happen within the next few years, and that was in 2005. So fast forwarding to today, we know that that is now happening, but it's taken about 20 years for the realization of some of those predictions to take place. And then there have been a few eras where people promised some really exciting technologies that then didn't actually take off as quickly. So one of those things is autonomous vehicles. If you go back about 15 or 20 years, people were talking about self-driving cars, changing all of our transportation, and we were no longer going to need drivers for the cars, and it was going to be the go-to for everyone all the time. And Elon Musk was predicting that people would have self-driving cars within 10 years. And now we're just getting to the point where Waymo is starting to be fine. You know, you can see Waymo's out I was in Atlanta the other day, saw some there. They're in San Francisco, but most places don't have autonomous vehicles even to this day. Another big era was virtual reality. Anybody here ever put on a virtual reality headset? Have you looked at VR? Oh, we got to get you guys out more. So virtual reality was promised as this amazing experience. And I can say the first time I ever put on a virtual reality headset, it was insane. It's you put on the headset, and it immediately makes it look like you're inside of a space. It's very eerie. And the first one I ever did, they put on the headset, and I was standing. You immediately you're standing on stage in a Cirque du Soleil performance. And as you look around, you can see all the performers behind you, and they're like leaning over you, and it's incredibly immersive. And so the technology is very powerful, but Meta imagined that the entire world was going to very, very rapidly start using virtual reality, and they changed the name of the company Facebook to Meta, and they were thinking that that was going to be a huge change. But today, look how few people are using virtual reality on a daily level, except as maybe gamers or some people that use it for exercise and things, which is what I use it for. Another really important area to consider was social robotics. About 15 years ago, social robots were going to be the thing, and everybody was going to get a robot for their house because older adults need that social contact, and people thought the robots can be trained to interact with us and help us manage medication and be friends. And Intuition Robotics is a wonderful company out of Israel that has a robot called LEQ, which some of you may have experimented with. And we tried out LEQ, and people are using them, but they haven't absolutely taken off. It's still a very minor product. Less than 1% of older adults have used an LEQ robot. So part of the reason I'm talking about this is that we need to think about the growth of AI in the context of a whole series of innovations that have been introduced with a lot of fanfare, but in many cases haven't really taken off or reached the promise that we thought they were going to reach. And meanwhile, the work that we've been doing in technology and social impact over the years has paralleled this. So going back to the early days, when people were doing computers, we were talking about community technology. So many of you work in community centers. Back in the 1990s, you may have established a computer lab there, or there was a lab nearby that people would go and take computer classes in. Those labs are still out there existing, but they've sort of emerged into more diverse applications that people are using today. A second big wave was what they call ed tech. The massive open online courses and the digitally driven tutoring programs, mostly for kids. There was a program called Sylvan Learning Systems that I used to work with in the early 2000s, where young people would have skills gaps, and the computer would assess where their skills gaps were and then direct the tutoring exactly at the things that they needed to learn so that they could begin, completing their knowledge. That whole era was sort of partly surpassed by a focus on broadband access. And one of the things that's very important in the context of AI is it requires a connection of some sort to the internet. And so one of the really big challenges is how are we connecting to the internet and who has access to broadband services? And so even today, one of the real questions that we have is how do we make sure that particularly lower income people or people that live in rural areas or people who live in underserved areas have equal access or adequate access to broadband services that they can use for the technology. More recently, there's been a focus on digital inclusion. Miami happens to be one of the national leading cities that's focusing on digital inclusion. There's a wonderful initiative here called Momentum Miami that OATS has participated in that's been bringing together investment from philanthropic entities that are helping to include young people and older adults, making sure that we have more of a level playing field for the technology. And then finally, there's been a whole movement around age tech where places like AARP are trying to get investment in technology that's not just teaching people to use it, but actually bringing in new entrepreneurs and new companies that will focus in the age tech space. And there's a whole movement around the country run by folks that are helping to promote and encourage investment in age-related technology services. So all of these things have been happening kind of in parallel. But they all follow a thing called that I like to identify as the Gartner hype cycle. Gartner is a research firm out there that a lot of large corporations use to analyze the future of business. And they recognize that for many of these technology initiatives, in the very beginning, when you have a new technology, it gets a lot of hype. Everybody's excited about it. You've got to put on a VR headset. It's going to blow your mind. Or you've got to check out this AI thing. It's going to completely change the way you think about information. I was at an event about 2 years ago listening to a futurist, a presenter who's an expert in technology. And he said, AI is not just the most important invention since the invention of the automobile. It's not just the most important invention since the invention of the railroad. I believe, he said, that it's the most important invention since the beginning of the printing press. And I thought, wow, that's a tall order. That includes toilets. It includes, antibiotics. It includes, a huge amount of things that we rely on today. And so this prediction that AI is going to absolutely transform our lives in this really profound way was a very ambitious and sort of aggressive thing to say. Gartner would say that's the beginning of what they call the hype cycle. There's this very steep set of expectations. People are making all these very elaborate plans and predictions, but they reach a certain peak, and then people realize, wait a minute, it's been 5 years. Where's my self-driving car? Or it's been 10 years. Why was everybody not in the metaverse? Why are we not using that at the office? I mean, I can barely get the QR code on my menu to work. And so why are we making all these predictions that then don't come true? And so they hit a kind of a bust of the hype cycle, and it starts to bomb, and everybody says, forget it, I don't want to try that technology because it's not any good. It doesn't work. So you can see that AI is starting to follow a little bit of this pattern. People are talking about AI changing everything, but there's a question of just how big is it going to get, and is there going to be a downturn in sort of our expectations? I can tell you Gartner, the company that does these predictions, last year issued a report, and they called that we've hit the top of that hype cycle, and we're now starting to go down. People are starting to get disappointed in AI and expect it to do more, and it's not doing what we're asking it for. To be clear, though, what they also recognize is that after everybody kind of corrects for the overhype, they also then correct for the disappointment. And they realize after a while that maybe it's not doing nothing, there's actually people out there using it. And so it becomes a going concern. And so, for example, there are people that use VR for applications, quite a few of them, and there's a lot of VR headsets out there being sold for gaming and for educational purposes. And I was at an event recently where people that were working in end of life were training death doulas, people that work with people who are dying, and they had a VR immersive experience that you could put on the headset and experience being on your deathbed and dying. And it allowed a person to go through that process as a training exercise that other people could learn from. So these applications find a kind of a use case, and then they begin to be useful over time, and then they kind of level out and they hit what they call the plateau of productivity. And I think eventually we'll get there with AI, but I would say that at this point, AI is kind of around that top of the peak there of the cycle and starting to drop off, where people are starting to ask questions of, you made a lot of promises and we spent a lot of money on this, and everybody's talking about taking over these data centers and whole cities and towns being driven by the technology, but we're not seeing it changing our lives as quickly as we want to. All right, so another slide here. So let's talk a little bit about, let's see here, there's the hype circle. And the hype cycle, you can see the slides here, where we are on the peak of that. And then I want to talk a little bit about some of the tech adoption trends that we're looking at that are actually the specific trends that we've learned about. So this is data from AARP. I work a lot with the research department over at AARP, and they do research every year asking people what they're producing in terms of what they're doing with the technology. And this shows a little bit of where people are. The gray lines here are 2016, and the orange bars are 2025. So just in about 10 years' time, smartphone adoption by older people went from 55% to 90%. This is the 50-plus population that they're surveying. Laptop adoption went from 56% to 70%. Tablets from 40 to 58%. So you see large increases in people's participation with these technologies, and you'll see that at the very end of it, you'll see that last line is regular cell phone service, which is non-smartphones, went from 57% in 2016 to only 16% in 2025. So older adults are now ditching the old flip phone, and they are picking up the smartphones. 90% of older Americans have a smartphone now over the age of 50. So there's really a significant amount of adoption going on here on the technology. 99% of people over the age of 50 that they interviewed own at least one device, whether it's a smartphone, a smart TV, a laptop computer, a tablet, all these different devices. 36% of people over the age of 50 own a wearable device, which is typically biometric and can monitor things like heart rate or even blood pressure. People have home assistants like the Amazon Echo and things like that. So you'll see this very large amount of technology adoption going on for older people. And they also are using huge numbers of digital services. Obviously, people are browsing the internet, but 79% of older adults are doing retail shopping online. You've got 79% using them for maps, for communication, and 3/4 of older adults are using them for mapping and for navigation. So really large numbers of people using these technologies. They asked about the use of generative AI, and this is quite amazing, actually. In 2024, they asked the question, and then they asked the question again in 2025. And these are fairly large surveys of about 1,000 people. In 2024, about 18% of older adults had used generative AI technology. 1 year later, 30% had used generative AI technology. So if you're out there in the community and you're working with people over the age of 50, you should assume that about 1 in 3 have used generative AI. And that's as of 2025. A whole year has passed. It's probably continuing to grow up and become significantly higher since then. Talking a little bit about barriers, it's not an easy road here. So there's a lot of challenges for people getting online and getting to use it. One of the challenges is the skill set. So they've asked people, do you have the correct skills that you need? And about 64% of people say, yes, I have the correct skills. That's good news in that it's 2/3. But it's bad news in that 1/3 of older adults don't feel like they have the skills available to use these technologies. And look at what happens when you look at the age groups that we're talking about. From 50 to 59, it's about 70%. That's pretty good. But when we're talking about people over the age of 80, it's down at 48%. So about half of older adults over the age of 80 feel like they really need more skills to use these technologies. We did some research at OATS a few years ago asking about broadband connectivity, and it's really important to think a little bit about how we are connecting to the internet and who's got access to broadband. Whoops, sorry, skip down there. And so we actually used all the census data that's available around the country to evaluate what percentage of older adults have broadband access at home. And by broadband, we were asking about wireline broadband, not cellular. And about 5 years ago, we found that about 42% of older adults lacked broadband at home. And the most recent survey that we did, it's about 32%. So about 1/3 of older Americans lack wireline broadband service at home. And this is going to be very important as we talk about the future of AI, because lack of broadband access and lack of the connectivity is a major barrier for people to participate actively with AI. And it's going to become even more important over the next few years as the data flows start to increase with AI. Let's see here, next slide there. So we, a few years ago, got connected with OpenAI. OpenAI is the company that sponsors, that created ChatGPT. And when they launched ChatGPT, they were a nonprofit. They were trying to make sure that they were being socially responsible. And so they reached out to us in AARP and they said, can you put together some programs to help people connect with AI? And so we connected with their team and they gave us a small grant, and we went to their headquarters. We started working with their software engineers, and we put together some initial trainings and questions about AI use. We then put out a survey to all of our participants. My nonprofit, OATS, runs a program called Senior Planet, which is the name of our center. It's the name of all of our programs. And we reached out to all the Senior Planet participants, and we asked them, are you using AI? We did a survey. 36% of them had used AI, so similar numbers to what AARP was getting. We also asked them, what are your use cases for? What do you want to use the technology to do? About 75% said they want to use AI to help explain something to them or teach them about something. So learning was the top choice for people. And there's a bit of a drop-off, and then the next highest level was to help people write something. 55% said they wanted to write with the AI. So the writing was an important factor. They wanted questions, answering customer service questions. 49% said they wanted help with diet and exercise. So there's a health component to it. And then there's questions on even things like consumer recommendations. So about 1/3 are using it for consumer recommendations. We asked them about their concerns about AI. What are you worried about with using the AI? By far the big three were fraud and scams, 88%. Misinformation and election concerns, 84%, and personal information and privacy at 81%. So very high concerns around fraud and misinformation. About a big drop-off then, about 42% said, we're worried about computers taking over. Are you folks aware of the concern about, the Terminator movie kind of dynamics with AI? So there is some concern about that out there. And there's a little bit of a fear that people are worried about the computers taking over the technology. We've asked how AI has improved their lives, and people say that it's been helping with them finding more information more easily, which has been a very profound change for them. And then the last question we asked is kind of a cool one. We said, to what extent does AI present you with the opportunity for delight or fascination in your life? And we found that 32% didn't really have an opinion, but about 1/3 agreed somewhat, and 15% said, absolutely, that's a big deal for me, that it's kind of exciting and changes my life. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges faced by AI. One of the big challenges that we're facing out here is hallucinations. Have people heard about the hallucinations with AI a little bit? So the part that's challenging with AI is that it will give you an answer to your question, but when it gives you the answer, sometimes it will give you a completely incorrect portion of that answer. And so it's hard to know when the AI engines are giving you accurate information and when they're hallucinating. And that's particularly challenging if you're asking it information about your healthcare or about something with your finances where there's a high stakes answer there. And so when you get AI responses, there's a need constantly to always be checking on the AI responses and correcting if they have an error in them. So there is that error rate. So even though it sounds really powerful and a lot of the information is really advanced, there's always that element of hallucination that appears widespread throughout the answers across all the platforms. Another issue with the hallucinations that we should be aware of is that the AI engines are learning from the information that's published on the internet. The problem is that as AI is existing and progressing, increasingly the information that's getting published is also the information the AI engines are learning from, and it has the hallucinations that came from the first round. So it's feeding bad content back into the AI's learning systems, and they're perpetuating the misinformation. And so there's really a big challenge with that, and people need to think a little bit about the future of AI and how they're going to correct for that. There are some strategies to make it better, but it is definitely not there yet. And whenever I use AI, I always double check all the data and all the answers that it gives me, because it's a good first step, but it's not the final answer. Another big issue with the challenges that we're facing with AI, one of the really largest ones, of course, is fraud and deepfakes. AI allows any bad actor to create a video with they can take a video of your face. I can take a picture of Max. Max, you're on the hook today. And I can put it in an AI engine and ask it to make a video of Max trying to sell you a used car. And it will do that. And then I could say, have him do it in Spanish. It'll convert it into Spanish. And he'll sound like he's speaking fluent Spanish, which is what you got your ish, right? But it's incredibly realistic. And so we've been working with people to train them to recognize that some of these fraud techniques that are out there have become supercharged with AI. It's taken what was already a bad situation with people misleading folks and giving them scams to something that's really empowered those scammers to present us with very lifelike and detailed information that often includes information that we think only our family members would know. So you'll get a phone call that sounds like it's from your grandson asking for money, but it's somebody using AI to do that. So those are real challenges that we have to face. And then finally, there are questions around the broader issues around what AI is doing to our economy. There's a huge amount of job dislocation that's coming from it, and there are a huge amount of changes that are taking place with how the AI with environmental applications and the use of the data centers in different cities around the country. I can answer questions about that as we need to. All right, next slide here. So I want to just close up with a couple of comments briefly about, we did some research about a year ago where I was able to call 5 different futurists around the country and ask them about what they thought the future of AI was going to be. I don't know if folks have ever heard of, say, Ken Dykewald. He's a pretty prominent gerontologist, or other folks, but there are people that have a sense of the future of AI. And then we also interviewed 10 gerontologists around the same questions. What is the future of the technology and where is it going? And so we took a whole bunch of notes and got a whole series of feedback from people about where they thought this was taking place. And I just want to share just a few of their overall thoughts. First of all, they all mentioned AI as a major direction for aging. I was surprised at how positive people were. Of all the people we talked to, none of them were saying, this is a catastrophe, nobody should touch AI and we should stop using it. They were excited about the changes that were taking place. I was surprised by how practical the answers were. They talked about people doing note-taking in doctors' offices and how it'll relieve a lot of the burden of the administrative stress. For many people who run programs that serve older adults, you have to do paperwork all the time for every case that you study or person you work with. And AI is going to help us do that more efficiently and save time and save money on it so that we can spend more time face-to-face with our patients and the people that we serve. So that was a really important area that they talked about. One of the big things that they raised that I thought was really interesting was about half of the people we talked to said, this is going to create a major social change in our society over the next 15 years, where AI will be available either as a very widespread consumer product that everybody has access to, which needs a lot of regulation in order to be able to operate properly for people. So we need to reset our regulatory framework around how medical care is delivered when patients are showing up with an AI solution and their doctor is having to answer to what ChatGPT recommended. We're entering a different era of how we're regulating information. And then the other scenario that many of them brought up was AI will start to become something that is at certain levels only available for people with money. It won't be as widespread, but if you have resources, you'll be able to pay for more access to AI. So that's already taking place now with entrepreneurs. If anybody here starts businesses or is active with entrepreneurship, you can see that AI is actively being used by people using what they call Claude, which is a programming tool, and they will start making, you can build a business website or a business strategy or marketing materials, but you have to pay for every request that you make of Claude, and it's becoming potentially more expensive. So imagine people that have resources saying, okay, I want this website, this tool to build me a new business, and I can spend $10,000 or $100,000 paying for the access to AI, but your neighbor who doesn't have that $10,000 is out of the picture. And so it could create a very strong, unfair, unequal playing field for older adults that are starting businesses or people that are trying to serve them. Second area that people talked about was elder care. The question of how we're helping people at home. We have this massive gap in the services that we have in terms of people we're serving at home. AI is presenting us with opportunities to do better elder care because it allows us to bring more information to people's homes. OATS just did a survey a few months ago of caregivers, and the number one thing that they raised was they needed more help managing insurance information. So the caregivers are spending an enormous amount of time calling on the phone and waiting for information and combing through the paperwork, and AI can help solve some of those problems at home to make things more rational and more efficient. But there's also the question of who's providing the face-to-face services. One of the major future possibilities here with the AI is robotics in the home. And so we've been visiting robotics laboratories. I went to the Consumer Electronics Show in January in Las Vegas this year, and everywhere you turn there was robotics. That was the big thing that people are talking about. It's the topic of the year. And AI is allowing us to have humanoid robots that basically are like they're like us, and the robots can provide services to people in their homes. And so the question is, when is that going to be something that's commercially viable? The biggest challenge with the robots is that the interface between the robot and the room and what it's doing requires a lot of data transmission, and the robots can't be slow with the data. The point about the robotics is that if I was looking at the future of AI right now, I'd be tracking robotics in the home. It's a real big opportunity for people, and the AI engines are going to change the capacity of those robots more rapidly than we think they are. That seems to be a real trend. Last couple of things here, social frameworks. People are connecting across networks that they never connected on. So for example, people using Meta, but also now folks that are doing a small business in San Antonio are going to start working and selling with partnerships in places like Miami. So looking at how globalized those trends are going to. And then finally, last two things here. One of the things that people raised is our bodies are no longer completely natural anymore. So many people have a hip replacement surgery, they have a stent, a heart stent, they have all sorts of different medical interventions, and we're walking around with wearables that are helping us with our sleep patterns or with our exercise or with our attention. And so this notion of people that are sort of partly technologically constructed is increasingly starting to look like a little bit of a science fiction reality, but that's already kind of upon us, and people are starting to track the data that they're handling. A lot of our futurists talked about the future of the sort of cyborg self. And then finally, this is the last part of that I wanted to just mention is we're all out here building systems for this. So they talked a lot about how people at the grassroots level that are service providers will be able to use AI effectively to serve their customers. And we did a survey of people in libraries and senior centers, and we found that their knowledge about AI was about average for most people. So about 30% were using it, but about 60% still weren't quite sure how to deploy AI queries and things like that. And so when we were providing them with services, they said, what we really need is for our line staff, our librarians or our senior center directors, our social workers need training on how to use AI so that when people come in with questions, we can help them directly with the questions that are most relevant to them. And so those are the things that we've been hearing about from people in terms of practice. So I'm being told we want to hold the questions for after the panel, right? So I'm going to stop here. I want to thank you for your attention to this, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more afterwards as well.